get extra credit. You should get another Emmy nomination, that's what I say. I mean, that's impressive. Well, I'm so grateful you could all stay up to join us because the 6th season is absolutely incredible. Peter, I want to start with you. First of all, congratulations. I wouldn't miss this panel for the world because this show has just been extraordinary for 6 seasons. Let's talk about that final season. And given that this is the time period that most of us do remember, did that make it the hardest to write and to figure out what this season is going to look like?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it was, you're more mindful of people close to the events that actually happened, but it was, 20 years ago. So for me, that's not journalism, that's history. And you have to remember that all these dramatic events are part of, what happened in the #1 family in the UK, and it's both defining for a nation's character, but also some of the ripples of the Diana story, the tragedy of her death. Those became international events, and so while you're always very mindful of the fact that this is close to some people's lives and indeed their families, exploring history is a legitimate thing for drama to do, and it's what The Crown has always done. And in some ways, writing deeper history was more difficult because you felt you were guessing a little bit more. Whereas in this final season, I had strong memories of what happened, and therefore I felt slightly more confident in my authorship.
So interesting. I hate that we only have 30 minutes. I could literally talk to you all for 300 hours at this point. Imelda, I want to go to you next. I will never forget interviewing you a few months after Queen Elizabeth passed away, and you were telling me you were inconsolable the day that you got that news. So what did portraying this remarkable woman mean to you both personally and as part of the legacy of The Crown?
Well, I think the legacy of The Crown, it was probably foremost in my mind because, as Peter said, this is a drama about, of course, real people. So I was very, honoured to carry the baton on, and I think it was challenging, difficult, and yet utterly rewarding, I think, for all of us to do this final 2 seasons. And there's no doubt that it was more difficult being the more recent Queen for me, and I tried not to let that affect me because I just had to also look at the script I was given, and I just feel that we all, took her death. It was a terribly difficult and sad time, but then we carried on as I imagined she would have done. So it was a pretty extraordinary time.
That last episode, by the way, we'll get to that in a second, but the very last episode of The Crown, I mean, to me, it paid the perfect homage to Queen Elizabeth, and it was just gorgeous. But first, Elizabeth, I want to talk to you about, first of all, the performance that you gave in these final 2 seasons. It's like nothing I've ever seen. The physicality, the mannerisms. What was the hardest part to get Diana's essence right? What was your prep like to bring this iconic woman to life?
Thank you. It was many layers of prep. I think the biggest hurdle was a psychological one of sort of giving myself permission to do it in a funny way. Really unlike anything I've ever done as an actor. This show is extraordinary. By the time I came on board, there was a sort of machinery that was churning in the most incredibly efficient way that meant that any research I wanted to do was available to me. We had amazing an amazing movement coach named Polly Bennett, who I sort of workshopped things with in terms of the movement. You know, it was about sort of understanding the map of a person's body in a way, and why a person moves in a certain way. That was a whole journey that was fed by the research I was doing and the amount of visual sort of research I watched. We have a dialect department that are incredible. I mean, so there were so many layers. And then we received the script, so it's sort of like I could have churned through that forever. And that was fascinating, but also really terrifying, because I thought, how will I ever get this right? But then the scripts appeared, and then it becomes clear that your job is, as it always has been as an actor, which is to sort of allow yourself to sort of be imaginative and own something, and give it as much truth as you possibly can. And so it's a dual thing of understanding where and why things might be a certain way in the person you're observing, and then allowing yourself to inhabit it. And it was a big challenge, but a very satisfying challenge in the end. Yeah, an amazing job.
There was one scene I wanted to ask you about in particular. I went back and rewatched the final 10 episodes over the last 3 days to prep for this panel, and I don't think you've probably been asked a lot about this particular scene, but it is leading up to the car crash. You are in the Paris hotel room and you're making that final phone call to William and Harry. You as the actor, you know that this is the last time their mother is going to talk to her kids, but you have to play it as if you're coming home the next day. What was that scene like for you?
A lot of what Khaled and I shot in episodes 2 and 3 was really playing against an end. That was very important to us, and so we made a lot of choices about what we wanted to put on the screen and leave with the audience, which really felt like it was about as sort of exploring as much joy and grace in a way as, and which is what we found on the page, which is what Peter wrote for us to play. That scene with the phone call with the boys actually was a huge relief. I was so happy to hear them. I had them in a little earpiece, and in fact, I think we shot that the day after the show came out. So I was very stressed that day, and I felt very scattered. And I just let that be what was happening in the scene, and then I sat down, and then someone called action, and then their little voices popped up in my ear, and I just felt enormously relieved and so happy to hear them. I was always happy to be around them. They're the most amazing kids, young men, and beautiful actors, so generous. And so I just let it be just a nice time, you know, in a funny way, which is what I felt the story wanted me to do. I'm not sure, yeah.
So beautiful. Khalid, hi, up there. I feel like we're playing Hollywood Squares. I want to ask you, apparently there's only 17 seconds of real life footage of the real Dodi. How did you, aside from Peter's tremendous writing, how did you find a way to bring this man to life, but also to humanize him? Because the public really didn't get a chance to know who he was, and it feels like we got a very complete picture this past season. So what was that like for you?
Yeah, no, I mean, it was a huge responsibility. I mean, here is this man who, as I kind of put it, has been on supermarket shelves and in the public eye for 26 years, and yet somehow people know until this very little about him. And there was just the word Playboy, and of course his, you know, the reputation of his father. And from that, in a sense, was an incredible opportunity to deconstruct that and discover the person who I think he was underneath it. Some of that's from the research around the time, and you get the first hint by, from journalists and stuff who spoke to his friends, who were always very upset with the reputation that had begun to sort of be in the public eye. Spoke to friends and people who knew him. And then, as you say, that 17-second recording, which is a sort of extraordinary thing, because it's literally him. He called into Larry King to ask Burt Reynolds to do an impression of Tony Curtis doing Cary Grant. It's the most ever in your life. But somehow from it also you get everyone who I've played it to, their mouth just drops. They kind of go, what? Is that really what he sounded like? And then you sort of ask themselves the question, how can it be that I have known who he is, but really not known these things about him? And, it's also something that later on kind of hit me as a gut punch later, is that in some ways he is the first Arab character that I can think of in cinema on this side of the world who you get to know and love, not fear, and therefore when he dies you mourn him. And in the context of all the wars and everything that I've grown up with over the last 40 years of my life, it's kind of extraordinary that that's the case. And I owe a huge debt of gratitude to Peter and to the Crown and to everyone I've worked with, that the dignity of giving the space to discover this character, to discover this family, has really been given. And with him specifically, I've had the huge honour, as well as being part of this extraordinary ensemble, but of working with Elizabeth and Celine. And for him, you have to kind of understand this key relationship with his father. And then at the same time, what I kind of consider this pilgrimage that me and Elizabeth went on, of trying to explore and honour this huge international cultural trauma that exists around their death, and really treat it as something sacred that you explore and hold dear. And I kind of always thought that our responsibility isn't so much to answer the questions that we don't have answers to, but to ask them as intensely as possible. And I think that's what the scripts and pieces were, and everyone that's what we did. And exactly as Elizabeth says, the thing you forget, even though their relationship was only six weeks from beginning through to end, they had so much fun, and so that was a joy to explore.
One of my favorite scenes, it's Khalid, it's you and Elizabeth, and obviously I don't think there's a way to know if this really happened, Peter, but you wrote this beautiful scene where Dodi takes a phone call from his father and pretends to tell him that he is, cutting off, well, first of all, he's not getting married and he's going to do things on his own. And then, we find out later, Diana says to him, I knew that you didn't really tell your father that, It was such a profound and interesting scene watching the both of you play that, but then your writing too. It just tied it all together so beautifully. Talk about that scene and also writing that and seeing their performances come to life.
Well, the great tragedy of Dodi is, I was pretty sure, based on all the questions I'd asked, everything I'd read, everybody I'd spoken to, that Diana was not intending to marry him. And I do know also, based on all the conversations and the reading and the research, that Dodi's relationship with his father was extraordinarily close, but also extraordinarily complex. And it just seemed to me that night, it's one of my favorite scenes in all 6 seasons, is that dinner that they have before, because all of us think, well, we know what happened in about 5 minutes' time. And we know where they were in their, we have a rough idea of where they were in their relationship, but what state were they actually at that night? okay? And we know that it had been a distressing evening in Paris, and so joining in the dots of that evening, and I absolutely knocked out by their performances, by the director, Christian Schrocho, who directed that episode. It's one of my favorite parts of the whole show, you know, and that particular scene, that phone call was just something where I just thought, that tells you the tragedy of a son living up to his father's expectations. And, you know, families and the complexity of families is what the show's about, and the devastation that families... It's hard to know whether families are the safest thing that you can do and give to anyone, or whether they should be avoided at all costs because of the damage they do. And of course, family is both, isn't it? It's both the most healing and safest thing you can have, and yet it's probably also the most dangerous set of people you'll ever meet. And that's you know, that's what I wanted to write about with Dodi and Mohammed El Fayed.
As an issue, I don't think you've gotten enough credit for the honorable way you handled the car crash and Diana's death and all of those scenes. I thought they were incredibly moving. They paid tribute to this iconic woman and this man that we didn't know very well. How agonizing was that for you to write those episodes? You started off the season with this man we don't know walking a dog, and all of a sudden here's a car crash, and then also incorporating actual footage, I believe, from Diana's funeral and the crowds, right?
Oh, yes, there were, yes, yes.
Which I remember watching that in college. Like, it was so moving to see that on screen. So was that the most agonizing part of writing this season, or the series as a whole?
No, I think dealing with the aftermath of the Queen's death was more painful. I think that, you know, don't forget, not just the United Kingdom, but the whole world had a sort of a mental and emotional breakdown in the aftermath of Diana's death. You know, it was such an enormous global cultural event. But for us all, you know, the Queen's death and of course, you know, that suddenly the whole sort of North Star of the show seemed to go, and navigating that with Imelda, you know, and Lesley, and the whole gang really, you know, all of us suddenly had to recalibrate, and so that ended up probably being more challenging.
Lesley, hi. I rewatched episode 608 last night, called Ritz, and you give one of the finest performances of your career as we see Princess Margaret she has a stroke, and how everything changes about her physically and emotionally in the aftermath. And there's one scene in particular where you're in the bathtub and the water is scalding hot and you can't turn it off. And if you haven't watched this in a while, go back and watch it in episode 8, because it's a masterclass in acting. What was that scene in particular like, the physicality and the episode as a whole? Because we truly see this heartbreaking side of Princess Margaret in her final months.
Well, thank you. You see her vulnerable, this woman that you've seen, that we know historically, but you've also seen through seasons 1 to 4. You've had a wonderful picture of this woman's life, this extraordinary life, this glamorous life. To a degree, a royal without a portfolio, so she had a kind of free rein to be more daring and more true to herself, perhaps, than a lot of the other members of the family. And suddenly, what Peter wrote so beautifully in that episode was a woman who you've celebrated her, and she has celebrated her own life, and you have all that rug pulled from under her feet, and of course illness and being incapacitated does not sit well with her, taken away from her, and you see her becoming frail, you see her struggling to come to terms with herself, when she can't be this, she can't be the beauty anymore, because she's suffering from these strokes. But yes, I do remember that scene in particular. I mean, it's quite a technical scene, really, because of taps and hot water and all of these ingredients that we had to get. But you know, through it all, you were, Imelda and I were so pleased. Well, that doesn't sell it enough, really. To do a whole episode that's really about. Peter was just saying about the complexity of families, which is so true. But what was so wonderful about that episode was that you really put the microscope on the very, very, very private side of these two women, these two sisters who loved each other so profoundly and had been through so much together, everything. They'd been through everything together. And the way that episode just said, this isn't a queen, it isn't a princess, it's two sisters, knowing that they're saying goodbye to each other. And it was profoundly moving to read those scripts and think, well, you know, I'm now going to get to play them with my dear friend Imelda, and I know that it's going to be easy. It's going to be easy, not the acting part of it, but just all of that stuff that I get for nothing when I'm working with Imelda. So yeah, fantastic episode. Seeing a woman stripped of everything that she clung to in such a celebratory way all her life.
Well, bravo to you, and bravo to you for that episode. I mean, it just, so heartbreaking. I love, Lesley, you talk about you and Imelda working together so closely and the bond that you have, and just the sisters come to life to see that. Speaking of these sisters, Robert Sturm, The Crown would not exist the way we've come to know it without your incredible eye for casting. Woo! I mean, it's that simple. And again, as I was watching, and I forgot about the young Elizabeth and Margaret, those teenagers that we see in the finale and throughout the season. And it's like, where did you even find those ladies to play these young iconic women? Because that's amazing. What has the last 6 years been like? What have your conversations with Peter been like? And what does this whole experience mean to you?
It's been a totally unique challenge, and I think that I remember there was a meeting 9 years ago or whatever, and the plan was that, you know, ideally you'd get through X number of seasons, and each two, it was like, it was always going to be recast. It wasn't going to be increasing levels of makeup. It had never been done before. We were like, is this going to work? How are we going to match these people up? Is it going to happen? And then as the years have, you know, gone by, you know, one by one it's happened. But no, it has been a kind of really kind of incredible journey to see if it could be achieved, and we're really proud of it, I think.
Make it sound so simple.
No, it's a lot. I mean, you have time to think about it as you go, and your thinking evolves as it goes through. And I think a real gift for a casting person is to be able to speak to the creator of it and really properly discuss who these people are, how they function. You've got double vision, because you've got to think of who played it previously and what were their qualities, and that's going to be, and then the next person, the handing of the baton has got to work. And then you've got to think about who these characters are in this next chapter of their lives and how that functions and who they become. And it's been a really, you know, fascinating journey. And kind of Peter's rigor of thinking is like really great, because you just need somebody who you can talk to and say what these people really are about. Not only in terms of who played it before, but what functions in the script, how they relate to each other, what we're saying about the people. It's just, it's been a fascinating job.
A couple of years ago, I remember in my first interview with Elizabeth, I said to you, Elizabeth, I was like, did you ever go in to audition for The Crown before season 5? And you said, yes, you went in for a role in season 2. You wouldn't tell me what it was. You said you would not believe it. But it was
Churchill.
Did you know then, when Elizabeth came in for season 2 to play Churchill, that you were like, I want to keep her, she could be a great Diana one
When
day?
she delivered the Churchill monologues, we did realise it.
Roll the tape.
I do remember thinking that she came in, and I just remember thinking and saying to everybody who's involved, please let's not cast her as this person in front of us, because there's going to be a time further down the line, and indeed there has been.
I should say I was quite willing to do this. I was so frightened of not being able to find Diana that I was quite willing to do the show without and to create it, and we'd figure out a way, because to do it with somebody who doesn't have Elizabeth's qualities and who doesn't make you believe, to have a Diana-alike, it's like a Clinton, casting Bill Clinton, not easy. Muhammad Ali, not easy. Diana, not easy, and she probably doesn't know the pressure she was under in my mind, because if Elizabeth had said no, I think I'd have had to reconfigure the show, and I was willing to do that rather than cast the wrong.
You were so relaxed though when we spoke. Didn't give any of that away.
Yeah, no, I was quite concerned. But
Do you remember I stole the book on your coffee table? No, you gave it to me, and then I walked out of the house, and then I thought, oh, I've done the wrong thing, and then I turned back around to ring the doorbell, and you'd already answered the door, so we actually both were quite nervous now that I think about it. It was like this farcical comedy of error. We got that.
I originally I met Elizabeth first when she was friends with Vanessa Kirby, who played Princess Margaret in the first 2 seasons, and I had thought, but then you never know. You never know. And I was entirely prepared to configure half the season through the Al-Fayeds. That's not to detract from Khalid. Khalid's now going to come and but at one point I just thought, if we can't do it that way, we have to do it another way. But thankfully she said yes.
And not just once, but twice with Emma Corrin too. Like again, it's just incredible what you have done. All right, I got to run through these next questions. This timer is killing me over here. Alison Harvey. This season, we escape to Mohammed and Dodi's very lavish lifestyle, this yacht, the Paris scenes, the Middleton family home. What was it? Was it so much fun to bring these new sets to life, or did it cause major panic? What was your process like overall?
It was great, actually. It was, really fun to sort of do another kind of dynasty in kind of parallel with the Crown, but the same obsessions about how to spend money. We've got kind of big houses, yachts. It's kind of quite a nice sort of little sort of parallel between what they choose to sort of do in sort of aristocratic terms as opposed to sort of new money terms. So that was quite fun to play around with. And then that was also in conjunction with the Balmoral at the beginning, with the old, very old, is that the son of the south of France with Balmoral was lovely. And then you kind of enter the Middletons, which is sort of a classic sort of kind of Middle England bland, really. So going into the world of very kind of ordinary, mundane, but nice, a nice family. So that was sort of, those kind of levels were nice to explore outside the sort of traditional Crown world, I guess. So,
Did you take anything with you when the series finished?
I've got the other bar of the audience room bell, actually, which for the Queen's audience room. We had one half left over, and we kind of made it on the hoof when someone had forgotten to pick up the prop. So, that's it.
There was nothing left after Stephen Daldry had finished with it all. He took the gates, the carpets, the curtains, the paintings, the silverware.
You guys could have raised a lot of money if you'd have kept all these sets. I mean, it could have I would have paid to go look at everything, just as I wanted to go to Kensington Palace. Could have made a lot of money from this.
Well, there was a big auction for charity and for the support of a film school, and we raised almost £2 million by selling stuff.
Amazing.
So,
That's fantastic. I love to hear that. Martin Phipps, you have earned 2 Emmy nominations already for your work on the series. The sweeping orchestra, all of it, it adds so much to every episode. How did you approach the score for the series finale episode, which is titled Sleep, Dearie, Sleep?
Well, I think the clue's in the title in that one. The great idea of having this traditional Scottish theme, Sleep, Dearie, Sleep, was a big starting point for the final episode. And Peter gave it to me one day and said, "We've got this, it's in the script, we're shooting it, and go away and do something with it." And we didn't know at that stage it was going to end up for the final scene, but I had a lot of fun. I had fun with bagpipes. They're not easy to record, but believe me, but it was that was a real treat to do. But it was also, you say sweeping, but there was also always I always wanted to get an intimacy in the music, and Lesley was talking about that, the intimacy with the characters, and often when I felt The Crown was at its strongest was its intimate moments, and it was so important that we kept that in the music. And you know, the solo French horn, I think, has the power of the establishment, but it also has the intimacy and the loneliness of that central character, I think, sometimes. And yeah, we kept that right through to the end as well.
Can you also talk about your reasoning? And I thought it was a perfect choice, but in one of the scenes when Diana and Dodi are in the car chase, before they're going back to the Ritz for dinner, and it's so chaotic and this reckless driving is happening, but all of a sudden we get this peaceful piano music playing over the chaos that's happening outside. What was your reasoning behind wanting to have the juxtaposition of this peaceful moment and then this chaotic?
Yeah, that's a really lovely piece of music written by Gabriel Yared, actually. Nothing to do with me at all. I'm happy to take credit for it, but you know, that was a beautiful thing put in by Peter and the editors, I think. So yeah, I have to pass on that question.